House of the Dragon Season 3, Episode 8 spoilers. What happens next? Spoiler warning. Before we begin, this video contains major spoilers for House of the Dragon Season 3, Episode 8, including events from George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood. So if you want to experience the finale completely unspoiled, this is your warning. But if you want to know what happens next, who betrays Rhaenyra, what happens at Tumbleton, and why this episode could completely change the balance of the Dance of the Dragons, let's get into it. House of the Dragon Season 3 has been building toward one of the most chaotic moments of the entire Civil War, the First Battle of Tumbleton. And after everything we saw in Episode 7, the biggest danger for Rhaenyra may not actually be Aegon. It may be the dragon rider she trusted. Episode 7 left us with several major developments. Aegon is alive. Sunfire is alive. Ormund Hightower has been secretly working on Ulf White. And Rhaenyra has no idea just how dangerous the situation inside her own army is becoming. The biggest question going into Episode 8 is simple. Will Ulf and Hugh remain loyal to Rhaenyra? The answer from Fire and Blood is one of the darkest betrayals in the dance. They become known as the Two Betrayers, and Tumbleton is where everything falls apart. The battle begins with the forces of the Blacks moving against Tumbleton, which is controlled by the Greens. On paper, Rhaenyra should have a huge advantage. Why? Dragons. The Blacks now have several powerful dragon riders, including Hugh Hammer on Vermithor and Ulf White on Silverwing. These two dragons are among the most powerful weapons Rhaenyra has. But there is a massive problem. The people riding those dragons are not completely loyal. Hugh has already become increasingly frustrated with the way the war is being handled. And Ulf has never exactly been the model of discipline. He enjoys his new power, but he also feels that the nobles around him look down on him. That resentment becomes extremely important, because when Ormund Hightower offers Ulf something he desperately wants, status, power, and recognition, Ulf becomes vulnerable. And once Ulf turns, the entire battle changes. But Hugh is even more important. Hugh Hammer is not simply another dragon rider. He controls Vermithor, one of the largest dragons fighting for Rhaenyra. If Hugh changes sides, the Greens suddenly gain an enormous amount of power. And that is exactly what makes the Battle of Tumbleton so terrifying. The betrayal isn't simply political. It is happening in the sky. Dragons that were supposed to fight for Rhaenyra can suddenly become weapons against her own army. And this is where House of the Dragon can deliver one of its most spectacular battles yet. The First Battle of Tumbleton is expected to become absolute chaos. Armies clash on the ground, dragons fill the sky, buildings burn, and civilians are caught in the middle. But the most important part isn't simply who wins the battlefield. It is what happens after the battle, because Tumbleton becomes a disaster for both sides. The betrayal of Ulf and Hugh causes enormous damage, and their actions show Rhaenyra's biggest weakness. She has managed to gather more dragons, but she hasn't necessarily gathered more loyalty. That distinction could cost her everything. Now let's talk about Aegon. At the end of Episode 7, Aegon and Sunfire's survival completely changes the situation. And more importantly, it gives him mobility. Aegon is no longer simply a prisoner being moved around by other people. He has a dragon again, and that means he can potentially return to the war. This is extremely important because Aegon's story is far from over. Many viewers may expect the season finale to finally decide who wins the dance, but that is not what happens. The Dance of the Dragons is only getting worse. Rhaenyra may win individual battles. Aegon may survive. Daemon may gather his forces. Aemond is still out there. And the Greens still have enormous military strength. There is no simple victory. Instead, the war becomes increasingly destructive. And this brings us to Rhaenyra. One of the most interesting things about Season 3 is how her position has changed. At the beginning of the war, Rhaenyra wanted to secure her claim while avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. But the longer the war continues, the more difficult that becomes. Every victory comes with another cost. Every new dragon rider creates another potential threat. And every betrayal makes Rhaenyra more suspicious of the people around her. Tumbleton could push her even further toward the ruthless queen we eventually see in the story. And there is another important character to watch: Daemon. His time at Harrenhal has completely changed him. The visions, the supernatural experiences, and his confrontation with his own past have forced Daemon to think differently about the war. But now the question is whether Daemon will finally become the weapon Rhaenyra needs. Because if the Blacks lose control of their dragon advantage, Daemon may have to take much greater risks. And there is also Aemond. The relationship between Aemond and Daemon remains one of the biggest unresolved conflicts in the dance. Their confrontation is coming. But the series does not need to resolve every major conflict in Episode 8. In fact, that may be the entire point of the finale. Season 3 is not necessarily about ending the dance. It is about showing us how much worse the war is about to become. The first Battle of Tumbleton is therefore much more than another battle. It is a warning. The dragons are no longer simply weapons controlled by kings and queens. They are becoming unpredictable forces of destruction. And when dragon riders themselves start changing sides, the entire political structure collapses. That is why Hugh and Ulf are so important. They represent the terrifying idea that anyone who controls a dragon can suddenly become a major political power. And Rhaenyra's decision to recruit dragon seeds may ultimately become one of the most dangerous decisions she ever makes. She needed dragons, but she also created new enemies. So, what happens next? The war becomes even more brutal. The Blacks and Greens continue destroying each other. Aegon remains alive. Rhaenyra's position becomes increasingly unstable, and the surviving dragons become more important than ever. But there is one thing viewers should remember. House of the Dragon is telling a story about the collapse of House Targaryen. This isn't a story where one side wins and everything goes back to normal. Even the eventual winner pays an enormous price. By the time the dance finally ends, the Targaryens will have lost family members, political power, and, most importantly, many of their dragons. The war that began as a fight over the Iron Throne ultimately destroys much of the very power that made the Targaryens almost impossible to challenge. And that is what makes the events of Episode 8 so important. Tumbleton isn't just another battle. It is another step toward the destruction of the Targaryen dynasty. And if the finale follows the major events from Fire and Blood, viewers should prepare for betrayal, dragonfire, political chaos, and some very painful consequences. The most shocking part may be that the greatest threat to Rhaenyra doesn't always come from across the battlefield. Sometimes it comes from the people standing beside her. And that is exactly what makes the two betrayers so dangerous. So, will Rhaenyra win the Battle of Tumbleton? Not in the way she needs. Will Aegon finally disappear from the story? Absolutely not. Will Ulf and Hugh remain loyal? This is where things become extremely dangerous. And will the Dance of the Dragons end with Episode 8? No. This is only the beginning of the final and most devastating stage of the war. Season 4 is where many of the consequences of these decisions will truly explode. And if you thought the Targaryen civil war was already brutal, the story ahead is about to become even darker. What do you think? Will Ulf betray Rhaenyra? Will Hugh follow him? Can Rhaenyra still win after Tumbleton? And most importantly, who do you think will survive the Dance of the Dragons? Let me know your predictions in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more House of the Dragons Season 3 theories, spoilers, ending explanations, and character breakdowns. Because the dance is far from over, and the next chapter could be even more shocking.